ironically, I was a bank manager at that point, living in a parent's bedroom with a huge amount of debt around my neck. And actually, I made some really big money mistakes when I was young. And it meant that I had to move away from home very quickly. At 18, I moved to live in rented accommodation in a one-bedroom room and very quickly got into debt. So I had this vision that I would be earning more in the future, and therefore I could borrow to see my way through and cope.
Hello, guys, and welcome back to the Future of Skills podcast. And today we're discussing a very interesting topic. We are discussing the financial challenges encountered by graduates and millennials. According to Student Loans Company, over 8 million people in the UK currently have outstanding student loan balances. It's said around 1.5 million loan applications are processed each year, which will include new and returning students. And so today we're speaking with John Piercy, a financial well-being coach, who will help us shed light on these challenges and offer valuable insights on how millennials and graduates can navigate their financial landscape with more confidence and resilience. John, welcome. Thank you for joining in. How are you feeling?
Yeah, good, thank you. Hopefully I can help around those subjects. There's some terrifying stats in there, but there's certainly some things that anyone can do with regard to getting in better control of their money. So let's see what we can do.
Yes, thank you. And indeed, the stats are not very encouraging. I know it's a case of, do you want to start smooth or do you want to start or sail with a little bit more of a realistic ground? And I prefer the second, prefer to give a little bit more of flavor to start with. On that note, my usual question to the guests that we're having in is to describe themselves. Please kindly, John, can you describe yourselves in 3 words of your choice?
Yeah, sure. Interesting question. So I'm a pragmatist. I'm action orientated, and I'm all about gratification. They would be my 3 words. Would you like me to expand on them, or shall we
Yes,
bring
please.
these
I was just about to say that there's especially the last word that I'd need a little bit more clarity on, but I'd love to get a little bit more of the why behind these choices, please.
Yeah, sure. So as a pragmatist, I'm all about how things really work. So there's lots of great theory around money and about how you can manage it and how you can affect it. And throughout my career, I've understood these things. The gratification piece is an interesting bit because there's 2 sides to this. So I get huge satisfaction from helping other people. Both from a financial point of view, the coaching that I choose to do that so that I can help make a difference, really, and I get a warm, fuzzy feeling inside from it. But outside of that, I work with my local community. I'm on the parish council for the same reason. But the dark side of this is that money is a huge source of instant gratification for people. People use money in order to give themselves an endorphin rush or a dopamine hit by spending money. And I have that same thing in me, particularly, and we'll talk about it probably a little bit more later, but certainly when I was younger, I used money in order to give me that instant hit and do the bad things with it rather than long-term benefit. So I still do it now if I'm not careful. So I'm all about gratification, both on the good side, but also on the dangerous side, and I have to control that. There's my 3 words.
Thank you so much, John. And I believe the answer that you have given and the motivations behind the 3 choices are nicely paving the way through to the next question. But at the same time, it's very interesting what you've said about the temptations and how it's easy to fall under that thinking, so that you can immediately be swayed into a different direction that you might not necessarily consciously want to take. So with that in mind, we'll tap a little bit into your experience and what has brought you into the world of financial well-being, please. I'm keen here to find out, was it circumstantial, or you followed a calling shaped up by your set of accumulated beliefs or values that you care about? What has it been for you?
Thank you. So I spent years working in financial services. I worked for a high street bank, started as a young lad and worked my way through, either helping customers directly or managing teams to help customers, but always really close to make people better off in one way, shape or form. I worked with mortgage colleagues giving advice on people buying their first home. I worked with banking colleagues who helped people manage debt and just starting out in life around savings. And then later on in my career, I managed financial advisors, helping already wealthy people get more wealthy, really, at the real high £1 million plus clients and customers. And found that strange. The further I got away from the baseline of helping people with their day-to-day finances, the less satisfying I found it. Making somebody slightly more wealthy who was already wealthy didn't give me that gratification buzz that I like as much as genuinely changing somebody's life by being able to enable them to understand things they could do differently to plan for the future. One of the things I did well throughout my career was listen to my own advice. So I did some good financial planning, which meant I was able to, about 4 years ago, choose to take early retirement. I know I don't look old enough, but
No,
and at
indeed.
that a bit of a forced piece of gratification for me there. But at that point, I was able to say, okay, so I'm not old enough to just sit back and read the paper each day. What do I want to do? And I came back to that piece. Where do I really enjoy it? Which is coaching, developing skills, helping people who wouldn't necessarily otherwise access to that piece. So I started working with a couple of companies who were looking for financial coaches, talking to people at a level below formal financial advice. I work with a company called the Wellbeing Project, who largely do workshops with employers, free workshops for the employees, so that we talk about all sorts of different things, from budgeting to pensions and investments to saving, that kind of thing, but also psychology of money as well. And I also work with a company called Finwell, where I do more one-to-one coaching on that basis. But again,
Excellent.
much around the same thing. People who normally wouldn't reach out and spend significant amounts of money to sit down with a financial advisor, either because they didn't feel that it would be financially viable to do so, or they don't understand the process. So it's more about the reward of helping people change their financial landscape rather than having to chase the pound to pay the bills. So that's why I ended up where I am today.
That's a very interesting motivation, and it paints quite nicely your character and values, as you've said yourself, in terms of, what things do you care about most. Now, let's talk a little bit about how you framed yourself, your set of skills from the early age. My question basically is, do you recall, or who would you name were some of the key supporters of your development when you were growing up, and how were you raised to interact with money at the time? Any big moments you remember?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was very fortunate. I came from a middle-class family with two elder sisters. I was the youngest one, and we had a decent upbringing, comprehensive school, well educated though, and did all right. And from a money point of view, there was never loads of it going around, but we never had to struggle. But one of the things that both my parents instilled in me very early on was the need that if you wanted something, you had to work for it. You had to save for it. In particular, they weren't kind of parents. I don't know whether they could afford to do it or whether they had to choose this route. But if I wanted something as a child that would give me, like a toy or whatever it was as I grew older, I would have to work for it. I'd have to go out and get a job and save some money. I worked from about age 14 in all sorts of part-time jobs to earn money in order to achieve the things that I wanted from a financial point of view. I don't remember them spending a lot of time talking about money and how to manage it with me. In fact, they definitely didn't, although they seemed to have a firm grasp on it themselves. But it was that instilled piece that certainly came through loud and clear. And actually, I made some really big money mistakes when I was young, and it meant that I had to move away from home very quickly. At 18, I moved to live in rented accommodation in a one-bedroom room, and very quickly got into debt. So I had this vision that I would be earning more in the future, and therefore I could borrow to see my way through and cope. And it wasn't until I was about 23, I think, that I came to a head 5 years in, had moved up and getting paid more, but still in debt. The debt was growing, and it ended up being about a year's worth of salary. In real terms, it was about £10,000, which doesn't sound like a huge amount, but at the time I was only earning that kind of amount. So it was a big chunk of cash. And I came to a realization at that point that this couldn't go on. I ended up having to make some really difficult decisions. I moved back home to live with my parents in my old teenage bedroom to completely cut costs out of my environment. Ironically, I was a bank manager at that point, living in a parent's bedroom with a huge amount of debt around my neck, trying like mad to pay it off. It took me about 2 years to clear it in total and get myself in a position where I could draw a line and go, right, okay, I'm never doing that again. Now let's move forward from it. But I had to learn from myself. I was embarrassed about that debt. I barely talked to my parents about it until I had to. Certainly didn't talk to anyone at work about it. And had some real hard lessons, but was fortunate enough that because I worked in finances, I kind of knew answers were. I just had to take the hard yards in order to do it. So that was a massive learning curve for me. And consequently, nearly 30 years later, I changed my financial pathway from that point. But hopefully that gives you some background in terms of where my earning comes from with regards to money.
What do you think might be some of the very first steps in terms of realizing that, look, there's obviously this temptation in terms of getting the so-called accessible education along the way, but the other, I suppose, side of it, which is not that positive, is you're committing to something that you need to hold yourself accountable to over the years. So it's not a short-term commitment. How would you say the youngsters need to navigate that temptation?
Yeah, it's an interesting challenge, and I've looked at it myself. I've got two grown-up sons, one of whom is in his third year at university. The other one chose not to. And a lot of that was with regards to the debt piece. And it's an interesting piece. On the one side, I see student finance as enabling everybody with the opportunity in order to get the education that they're capable of, and potentially change their life. And it certainly can do that. And there's lots of evidence to just show that whilst student finance and student debt is significant in size, typically people then earn more money as a result of going to university than not. So it's more like a tax rather than a debt. Typically, the average is about 15% more income against a cost of about 9%. So in reality, it can be worth it. However, that's a generalization. And depending on the subjects that people study and depending on the value that they can get from that and how it can influence their future career, it does very much depend whether those maths stack up, so to speak. There's also a lot of peer pressure. The view is that everybody goes to university and it's not just about the education, it's about the lifestyle and everything else as well.
Indeed.
But there are plenty of other options on that. Myself, when I joined First Bank, on 3 occasions I did 3 separate pieces of further education throughout my career, the equivalent to degrees, which are all paid for by the employers. And I've used far more than I ever would have used any degree that I achieved, because they were specific to the roles that I was doing and indeed essential to them as well. And for some people, those options are absolutely available as an alternative. But then again, it's often the case at 18, 19 years old that people don't know what they want to do. And actually what university does is open the mind and open the ideas of where potentially they may go. most people don't have as clear a vision of this is what I want to achieve. So
Exactly.
it can be difficult, but I think whatever happens, people should go into it with their eyes open to understand how the debt works, the size of it, ways potentially of mitigating sort of working through university, which many people have to do, but some people can choose to do to mitigate the debt as well. And then just understand what the options are at the other end as well, so that they can control and pay that off over time and not get additional debt built up outside of the student too. So yeah, it's not easy, but it's all about knowledge, and it's about conversations, I think, as well, with peer groups and families to properly understand the implications of taking it on board.
Yes, indeed. And the risks that you expose yourself to when it comes to making these decisions, which are crucial for one's lifetime even, because ultimately it's all about the habits that we form along the way.
Unfortunately, it's also not taught at school very often in the UK.
Yes, there's another good topic I wanted to touch base on.
Yeah, so that first experience of how do I budget, given a load of maybe £3,000 lands in your bank account on the 1st of October, ready to go to university, and they say we'll give you some more in January, and that you've got 3 months to deal with. How do you actually make that money last? How do you achieve just a natural controlled budget when everyone's saying, right, come out, let's do some stuff, we've got Freshers Week to hit, and you could, if you're not careful, spend a great deal of that in the first week. So there's loads of valuable things in there that people can learn, but it's about education. Some of the banks do some work in advance. I know the student unions do, but many people don't find money very exciting. They see it as a means to an end rather than something they want to sit down and learn. And many of their parents don't have strong financial knowledge or understanding either, so can't easily educate them before they go away. In addition to that, talking about money is a taboo subject in a lot of people's views. We don't like talking about money. It makes us feel uncomfortable. So these are all things that work against people in terms of those core beliefs and learnings and education that people can get. It's a real problem. It's easy for me to say we should talk to people about it. We should go and gather the information on the internet like this, for example, and listen and learn. But there are those simple things that people can do, some small steps, just adding some financial education into people's social media feed, whether that's Instagram follower or listening to a podcast, or signing up for one thing on their YouTube feed that gives them a bit of financial education around a subject that's important to them, can make a real difference. These are learned behaviors. They're not rocket science by any stretch of the imagination.
Absolutely. And the fact that you alluded to the educational system, as a parent of smaller, younger kids, I can definitely resonate with that. I've done some digging as a parent as well, trying to find out if there is something that could be useful to them. Now, often you might find, probably you'd resonate that too, with that, is that there would be some content served in feed whenever they see that there's an interest towards something. And it came from a Canadian author who made a book or a series of books called Save It for young children, which I thought was really interesting because it gives them a series of smaller exercises as to how to understand when you're going shopping, for instance, what do you need to buy, how much do you have in your pocket, how much of that is being left for you, how do you then keep track of what's left, and how do you then spend or plan your spend onwards. They even have like the various tables in that book so that they can see where do they put their vegetables in, or things like that for their key expenditures such as food and then clothing and then whatever other needs. So it's trying, as you say, it's all being passed on in the form of a learned skill. It's not an inherited skill. And if that's the case, of course, there could be some other tools out there available, be it online or offline, as you say, going through to some workshops or being part of some communities if there are some initiatives of that sense. But would be good to see more of it, I suppose, is something that we might both agree on.
One of the things I do, I've got a daughter who's 12, and she's well, she's really keen on spending as much money, of my money as possible, really, on cosmetics. But one of the things we make a point of doing is set budgets for her. So we give her pocket money and it goes into a bank account rather than just buying things for her, so that she can understand that if she wants to blow all of that on some lip gloss or something, well, she's not getting any more for another 3 weeks, and she's got to save towards it. During holidays, we set budgets around entertainment. So I'm sure people with children would resonate the "I'm bored" conversation. So we set budgets to say, well, this is how much you've got to spend during the summer holidays. If you blow it all in the first week, it's going to be a really dull holiday. But if you save some, then there's enough in there in order to take you and your friend to the cinema or go bowling or something. But not every day, because that isn't going to last that long. So figure out the budget and decide what you really want against what you just want right now because you're bored. And that's a really valuable lesson, particularly for people as they get into employment, as they go through university, that instant gratification versus longer term reward learning with regard to money. Because, and that's where I come back to the gratification piece. Money is all about making, or long-term money management is about making potential sacrifices in the here and now to achieve a greater long-term goal. And that's something really difficult to do for human beings, because we are inherently driven by instant gratification. We like to
here and now, please.
Absolutely. We're all about the here and now, and everything in the modern world drives us towards that instant nature of things. But the problem with that is, if we just focus on that, then tomorrow comes around really quickly, and people will very quickly switch off if I start talking about pensions and things, but they'll thank me for talking about it in 30 years' time, when suddenly it becomes a desperate thing, when we could have done something so much before on things like that. So that's where that early learning is really powerful, even if it's just the cost of an ice cream at a shop versus saving it for the end of the week for something bigger.
So thank you so much here, John. I believe you've quite nicely showcased a few good skills that we can talk about. It's definitely the accountability, from what I can see. It's planning ahead, being able to foresee certain circumstances. And at the same time, it's also the ability to see a few steps ahead of yourself a little bit, so that you can refer back to the reality, the current state of things, and then the mission. Where do you want to go? What do you want to have? What do you want to look into your set of future assets, so that you can somehow plan that ahead, or visualize, as you said yourself, I had a vision of wanting to do something. So therefore, even the youngsters need to, I suppose, from however early age, if there is something that they feel very motivated by, then there needs to be some form of a vision associated to that. I know that my little son, he has once asked a question around, when do you think it's realistic to own a house? And he's only 6, so it's like, it's
it's
really,
well, that's ambitious. That's good.
but it's like trying to figure out how they think, because you've nicely alluded to the fact that there is this factor of controlling your emotions, especially when they're driven by some instinct shopping. Whenever you're seeing a trigger, especially that we as advertisers in our space, or marketeers, are to be blamed for that, I suppose, to an extent, because there's tons of messaging out there. It's all about you being able in a very cold shower mode, analyze everything and have some critical thinking along the way. So I suppose that these type of skills are very helpful for both youngsters, but even the adults, I suppose.
Very definitely. A lot of the one-to-one sessions I have are about debt management and spending control, and it equally applies at all ages. We all have different spending triggers. It's how we know how to control them. And the advertising piece, and yes, social media and the way that we access things are a lot more instant than they used to be, but they were always there, just different forms of drives for for that that want versus need in terms of where we spend our money. Yes, there'll be different things, but they were always there in the past. And you know, it is that bit of, do I want this now because that will make me feel good in whatever way, shape, or it will solve an immediate need I've got, be that hunger or boredom or just solving a problem, against that greater good of, but if I don't spend it, actually I could achieve something that will genuinely change my life in the future.
Definitely. So, especially when you're talking about the topics of savings and how do you go down that route?
Yeah, sure. So there are some simple things with regard to saving that can really make a difference. One of the first things, as I've already mentioned, is about understanding what it is that you're saving for. What's the goal? Exactly. And make the goal as clear as possible. The goal isn't just something. It's about how you're going to feel once you get there. It's about what it's going to
totally agree.
So emotional, let's say you're saving for, I don't know, a holiday or to clear some debt even. That piece of how will I feel when I've got there? What will I have achieved? What difference will it make to me at that point is a real powerful motivator. And you can apply this outside of money, but the clearer the goal is and the clearer the motivation, the why to achieve that, the more likely you are to do the difficult bits in between in order to get there. The more likelihood you are to make the sacrifices to say, actually, I am going to save £100 a month because I'm committed to that. So I really want to do it. And if that means I can't go out this weekend and blow 100 quid on a Friday night and have to stay and watch Netflix instead, then I'm prepared to do that because that goal that I'm reaching for is strong enough that I can do it.
Motivation.
So so that's the first step. Make the motivation as big as possible with regard to any financial goal, and you're much more likely to get there. The second piece for me is about breaking it down into small chunks and making it as easy as possible. Now, these days, with regards to money management, that can be really, really easy. Certainly anyone with a bank account generally has got access to their bank account 24/7 through a mobile phone, which means they can instantly do things to make a difference. They don't have to book an appointment with the bank or go and physically do something. They can think it, do it, make it really simple. So it's things like setting a standing order, a regular payment. I talk about paying yourself first. Now, this is particularly valid for people who are getting paid, but on the day you get paid, you move the amount of money that's going to help you achieve your goal somewhere different. It's out and out of mind. So, and this could apply to anyone, but if you're looking to save for something in particular, you set up a savings pot that's specific for that aim. So you bank with one particular bank. There's a real advantage setting up that savings pot with a different bank so you can't see it on a day-to-day basis. So to go and look at how much you've got, you actually have to go somewhere else rather than it just being a tag onto your bank account. Because if it's there, there's always that temptation of thinking, I've always got that money I could just dip into.
I can take some.
Yeah, I could just take a bit. I'll put it back, but I could just dip into it. So it's also a really good way of getting better interest on it as well, because typically standalone savings accounts will pay you more interest than one that's attached to your main bank account. And there are some other simple tips you can do. So, for example, you can have savings challenges that this gets people into the habit of saving money. So I love savings challenges. So you can say things like, right, 1 week in 4, you're going to have a no spend week. So anything non-essential, you can't spend your money on. Now, if I said that to someone every week, that makes life very boring very quickly, and they won't achieve that. It's like most people fail on a diet because you're just cutting out the things you like for a period of time. But if you change your behavior, you're much more likely to actually achieve long-term goals. Same with savings. So you say, I'll have a no spend week. So I'm allowed to spend the money I normally would on things, whatever it is, takeaways or going out, third week of the month, I'm going to save that money instead, and I'm not going to spend the money on whatever my vices are that I normally spend my disposable income on. It's a much easier way to save, and it can make quite a significant difference. But the other thing it brings the behavior of is actually I can cope with only doing that thing 3 weeks out of 4 rather than every week. Actually, I don't have to have that as much. I don't actually notice the difference so much. So can I make some sacrifices in my lifestyle spend in order to achieve that goal? So that's a really good savings challenge that works. The other kind of things you can do, particularly these days, another one I love is about called Roundup, where nearly everyone spends money on debit cards. And
yes.
Roundup allows you just to round it up to the nearest pound, and the change goes into a savings account instead. And over the month, it can be a significant amount. Often more than 50, 60, 70 pounds goes into savings without you really noticing. It's the equivalent of taking your loose change out and putting it in a jar when you walk through the door. But nobody does that anymore because nobody uses cash. So
yes, true.
It's the online equivalent. So there's lots of different behaviors in there, but hopefully a few of them resonate. But they're all about getting some simple, easy behaviors in place to start a habit of saving. And then once you get into that habit, it becomes addictive like anything else. You see that money building up and you think, I like this, and this is what it's going to help me achieve. And actually I can save. It gets into the habit.
I very much resonate with what you're saying, John. Thank you so much. And especially with what you were saying around the Roundup scheme. I would call it scheme because it kind of resonates with a little bit more savvy approach in that sense. But at the same time, the fact that you need to put on aside your savings into another account, into another bank. So literally just not have it seen on a regular basis avoids that trigger and that temptation a bit more, which to me sounds reasonable to keep your emotion a little bit under control, which is very much needed at times.
And you can do that at any level. So as a student, for example, when you get your money at the start of the term, you can put that into one side and then drip feed money in as an allowance each week as another way of doing it so you don't spend it. So there's lots of different ways that achieve that same goal. But it is about just not having that money instantly available, because temptation is very real with money. It's back to that instant gratification piece. Oh, I could go and do that now, and for the next 3 hours I'd really enjoy myself, but the longer term loss would come from it.
And what I find quite a key factor in what you were talking about so far is this feeling terminology. How would it make you feel after all by achieving one goal or the other? Or if it's probably something instinctive, something that you would not thought about long term, but it just comes as a trigger and lures you into something that you might not be necessarily wanting to do straight away. How do you react to that? Do you have some form of a formula almost in place to say, okay, I'm protecting myself from this. There's a little bit more of a wall I'm putting in place, or a gateway. So trying to pass through it. It's not that, for those who don't think too much about those things, they're not necessarily protected from it. So it becomes a bit dangerous. Thank you so much, John. I think there's been quite a lot of nice advice that you've shared so far, especially on the, awareness side of things, accountability, as we've taken out from the conversation, and the fact that you need to plan ahead, be mindful of the steps and choices that you're making. And at the same time, on the savings route, being aware of all of the myriad of great resources that are available out there for everyone to choose from, and the capabilities around that could be improved over time. There might be a few questions if anyone might ask after this, after we will post this content live and make it available. If there would be some who would have some questions over to you, I'm sure that you'd be making yourself available to get in touch and answer these.
Put a link in for LinkedIn and just tap me up and ask me questions. I'm really happy to help in any way I can. You know, although I'm a qualified financial advisor, there's no charge. Just reach out. I'll happily help.